January 23rd, 1967. An American general flew into the Vietnamese jungle expecting to see Allied soldiers doing the same things his own troops did, just with different accents. Instead, he watched 5 men accomplish what he thought required 500, and what he saw that day made him question everything he knew about warfare. What did those Australian SAS soldiers do that was so different it changed how American generals thought about fighting in the jungle? The heat hit like a wall. Major General William Pearson stepped off the helicopter into air so thick with moisture it felt like breathing hot soup. It was January 23rd, 1967, in Phuoc Tuy Province, the Australian area of responsibility in Vietnam. The temperature sat at 35 degrees. The humidity reached 95%. His uniform stuck to his skin before he took 3 steps. Around him, the jungle pressed in from all sides, a wall of green so dense he could barely see 15 meters in any direction. The smell hit him next, a mix of rotting plants, wet earth, and gun oil. Somewhere in the canopy above, insects screamed their endless song. This was Phuoc Tuy Province, and this was where the Australians fought their war. General Pearson had not come to Vietnam to watch other people's soldiers. He commanded American troops in the Central Highlands, where the fighting was hard and the dying was constant, but the numbers coming out of the Australian sector made no sense. The reports claimed that the Australians were killing 20 enemy soldiers for every one of their own men lost. American units were lucky to reach 3 to 1. Something was happening down here in Phuoc Tuy that defied everything Pearson had learned in 2 wars and 25 years of service. He needed to see it with his own eyes. What he was about to witness would shake the foundations of everything he believed about jungle warfare. The crisis was simple and brutal. By early 1967, the Americans were bleeding in Vietnam. Large operations with 300 to 500 soldiers swept through the jungle like giant brooms, making noise, clearing trails, searching for an enemy that simply vanished. The Viet Cong heard them coming from kilometers away. They set ambushes, planted mines, fired mortars, then disappeared into the green hell before American firepower could respond. For every 4 American casualties, the enemy lost maybe 3 fighters. The math was not working. The jungle was winning. Pearson walked into the Australian headquarters tent. Maps covered every surface. Red marks showed enemy positions. Blue marks showed friendly forces. The Australian colonel briefing him spoke with a clipped accent. He pointed to areas on the map. The 274th Viet Cong Regiment operated in this province. So did the D445 Viet Cong Battalion. Together, they had about 2,500 fighters. They knew every trail. They knew every hiding spot. They knew every place to run. American doctrine said to find them and crush them with overwhelming force. Reality said they were ghosts who killed and vanished. The Australian colonel explained how American units operated. A rifle company had about 120 men. They moved through the jungle in formation. They carried radios that crackled every 30 minutes with status reports. Each soldier hauled an 80-pound pack. The column stretched for 100 meters or more. They cleared trails with machetes. They moved 4 to 6 kilometers each day. At night, they set up defensive positions with claymore mines and trip flares. The enemy heard them coming and simply left. Or worse, the enemy waited in ambush and struck when the Americans were stretched out and vulnerable. Pearson knew this pattern intimately. He had sent companies into the jungle dozens of times. They humped through the heat carrying their enormous loads. They crashed through the undergrowth. They made contact, called for artillery support, called for airstrikes, fought brief, violent battles, and counted bodies. Then they moved to the next grid square and did it again. It felt like war. It looked like war, but it was not winning. The enemy kept coming. The casualties kept mounting. Something fundamental was wrong with the entire approach. The jungle itself was the enemy. The triple canopy blocked out the sun. Vines hung like ropes. Thorns tore at exposed skin. Leeches dropped from branches. The ground was either mud that sucked at boots or hard. Red clay that rang like concrete under footsteps. Visibility dropped to nothing. Sound traveled strangely, bouncing off trees, muffled by leaves. A man could be 10 meters away and invisible. The weight of equipment crushed soldiers after hours of movement. Sweat poured constantly. Water ran out. Feet rotted in boots. The jungle did not care who was American or Vietnamese. It tried to kill everyone equally. The Viet Cong adapted to the jungle. They moved in small groups. They used trails that Americans never found. They lived on rice and dried fish. They carried light weapons. They struck fast and ran. When American companies came looking for them, they either ambushed the column or melted away. They planted mines on the obvious routes. They set booby traps near likely rest areas. They watched American patterns and exploited every predictable move. The Americans brought overwhelming firepower to a fight where firepower meant less than knowledge and patience. Pearson had been briefed on the Australian task force. They operated differently, people said. He expected minor variations, maybe some British-style formations or different radio procedures. He did not expect what came next. The Australian liaison officer, a captain with sun-darkened skin and quiet eyes, walked up to him in the tent. The general explained why he had come. He wanted to see how the Australians achieved their results. The captain nodded slowly. He said the general could observe an operation. Then he said something strange. He said the general would not see much. He said that was rather the point. Pearson frowned. Not see much? He had come to observe combat operations. The captain explained that an Australian SAS patrol was preparing to move into the long high hills. The patrol would be gone for 14 days. They would operate deep in enemy territory. They would gather intelligence. If things went perfectly, they would never fire their weapons. If the general saw them at all, something had gone very wrong. Pearson felt his confusion deepen. A patrol that tried not to fight? Soldiers who measured success by staying invisible? This contradicted everything in the manual. The captain offered to brief the general on the patrol's mission. Pearson agreed immediately. They walked to another tent where 5 soldiers sat checking equipment. These were SAS troopers, the caption explained, Special Air Service. They did not look special. They looked small, actually, compared to American soldiers. They were lean and sun-weathered. Their uniforms were faded. Their weapons were clean but worn. They moved with economy, no wasted motion. They checked and rechecked every item in their packs. They worked in silence, broken only by hand signals and occasional whispers. The briefing revealed the mission. 5 men would walk into the hills 6 kilometers northeast of the base. They would move slowly through unmapped jungle. They would avoid all trails. They would observe enemy movement patterns. They would locate camps, supply routes, weapons caches. They would call in their findings by radio. Then artillery and airstrikes would destroy what they found. The patrol would cause maximum damage without ever being seen. Contact with the enemy meant failure. Getting spotted meant failure. Making noise meant failure. Success meant being a ghost that killed from a distance. Pearson listened with growing disbelief. 5 men for 2 weeks without resupply? The captain confirmed everything. 5 men, 14 days. 1 resupply drop if absolutely necessary, but preferably none. No fire support for the first 72 hours unless the patrol was about to be overrun. No extraction unless they were compromised. Their job was to watch, count, map, and report. Other forces would do the killing based on what the patrol learned. Pearson thought about his own companies with their 120 men, their supply lines, their artillery support, their air cover. These 5 Australians were being sent into hell with less than a squad's worth of soldiers. The general asked the obvious question. What if they ran into a large enemy force? The captain's answer was simple. They would hide. The general pressed further. What if the enemy found them? The captain said they would not be found. The general felt his frustration rising. This was not how wars were fought. You brought force to the enemy. You closed with them and destroyed them. You dominated the terrain. You showed strength. These Australians were talking about hiding in the jungle like animals, watching and waiting. It felt wrong. It felt weak. It felt like the opposite of everything Pearson had been taught. But the numbers did not lie. The Australians were achieving results that seemed impossible. Their casualty rates were a fraction of American rates. Their intelligence reports led to strikes that killed 10 times more enemy than direct infantry contact ever achieved. Something about this backwards approach was working. Pearson decided he would observe this patrol operation. He would watch these 5 men walk into the jungle. He would see what made them different. The captain warned him again. He would not see much. That was the entire idea. The best soldiers, the captain said, were the ones the enemy never saw until it was too late. Pearson wondered what that meant. He was about to find out, and what he learned would change everything he thought he knew about fighting in Vietnam. The briefing room fell quiet as the patrol commander stood up to explain his plan. He was a sergeant, 28 years old, with skin burned dark by the sun and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His name was classified, like all SAS names. He unfolded a map on the table. The general leaned forward to study it. The sergeant's finger traced a route through blank green spaces on the map. No trails marked, no villages shown, just contour lines showing hills and valleys. The patrol would move through terrain that American maps called empty. The sergeant said it was anything but empty. The enemy lived there. The patrol would live there too for 2 weeks, invisible and silent. The backwards logic started immediately. The sergeant explained that his 5-man team would carry exactly 200 rounds of ammunition per man. General Pearson blinked. His rifle platoons carried 800 rounds per soldier. The sergeant saw his expression and explained. Ammunition was heavy. Weight slowed you down. Noise discipline was more important than firepower. If the patrol needed 200 rounds per man, something had already gone terribly wrong. Their job was not to fight. Their job was to never be in a position where fighting was necessary. Pearson started to object, then stopped. The numbers said this approach worked. Let the man talk. Each soldier would carry 35 kilograms of equipment. That was less than half what American soldiers carried. No change of clothes, no extra boots, no comfort items. Food for 14 days, all cold rations. Water for 3 days, then they would find more from streams. Radio with spare batteries, medical kit, ammunition, grenades. That was it. Everything else was weight they did not need. The sergeant said they would move 1 to 2 kilometers per day through jungle, Americans thought was impossible to cross. They would not use trails. Trails were where the enemy waited. They would cut their own path, slowly, silently, leaving no trace. The contrast hit Pearson like a hammer. His rifle platoons had 40 men. They moved 4 to 6 kilometers daily on established trails. They carried radios that reported position every 30 minutes. They cleared brush with machetes. They talked in normal voices during breaks. They set up perimeter defenses every night with mines and flares and interlocking fields of fire. They announced their presence to everything within 2 kilometers. The VC heard them, avoided them, or ambushed them. Either way, the Americans were never invisible. The SAS patrol would operate in total silence. No talking except in whispers during radio checks. Hand signals for communication. Pressure signals on the shoulder of the man in front for danger or stop or enemy spotted. No smoking because scent carried 500 meters through still jungle air. No washing because soap smell alerted the enemy. No insect repellent because the chemical odor was like a beacon. Cold food only, no fires, no cooking smoke. They would sleep in something called cold harbor positions. No movement after dark, no lights, no sounds. Freezing in place if anything threatened detection. Living like prey animals, invisible and alert. The training difference explained some of it. American soldiers trained for 8 weeks in basic infantry skills. Fire and maneuver, call for support, assault positions, hold ground, standard doctrine going back decades. SAS soldiers trained for 18 months before ever seeing combat. 3 weeks of jungle survival, learning to live on what they could find. 6 weeks of tracking school, studying how to read signs invisible to untrained eyes. Language training in Vietnamese. Resistance to interrogation if captured. Navigation without maps or compass. Silent communication. Ambush recognition. Everything Americans learned in weeks, Australians learned in months. What had to be unlearned was almost as important. Every instinct in conventional training said to fire first when threatened. SAS doctrine said to hide first. American training said to call for help when in trouble. SAS training said to solve your own problems because help might not arrive for hours. American soldiers learned to move with purpose and speed. SAS soldiers learned to move 1 step per minute if necessary, freezing mid-stride for 30 minutes if a sound suggested enemy presence. Speed got you killed. Patience kept you alive. What had to be mastered seemed impossible. The sergeant described tracking skills, reading bent grass from 3 days earlier, distinguishing between 47 different types of broken twigs, each telling a story about who passed and when. Identifying human scent from 50 meters downwind, recognizing the smell of rice cooking versus the smell of fish. Source versus the smell of tobacco, seeing the faint depression in dead leaves that marked a footstep from yesterday, following trails the enemy thought were invisible. The jungle revealed everything to those who learned its language. The philosophical difference cut deepest. American doctrine preached closing with and destroying the enemy. Find them, fix them, fight them, finish them. The 4 F's drilled into every soldier. SAS doctrine whispered something different. Know the enemy so others may destroy him. Watch, learn, report, direct fires from safety. Success was not the number of enemy killed by your rifle. Success was the number of enemy killed because of your intelligence. 1 patrol could generate targets for artillery that killed 40 enemy. An infantry company might kill 12 in a week of hard fighting and lose men doing it. The Americans measured success in body count. Higher headquarters demanded numbers. How many enemy killed today? This week, this month, the pressure pushed units to seek contact, to find the enemy, to engage. The Australians measured success in intelligence reports. How many camps located, how many trails mapped, how many artillery missions called, how many airstrikes directed. The enemy died, but they died from shells and bombs guided by invisible watchers, not from close combat that cost friendly lives. Early results made no sense to conventional thinking. The sergeant showed Pearson a report. 1 5-man patrol, 10 days in the field, 0 contact, 0 shots fired. Intelligence gathered led to 3 artillery strikes. Results? 37 enemy killed, 2 ammunition caches destroyed, 1 command post eliminated. Patrol casualties? 0. Compare that to an American company operation in the same area the previous month. 8 days, 14 enemy killed in direct combat, 23 Americans wounded, 4 killed. The conventional operation felt like war. The patrol operation felt like nothing was happening. But the patrol killed more than twice as many enemy without losing anyone. The statistics got more extreme. SAS patrols were achieving kill ratios of 20-1 or higher. For every Australian casualty, 20 or more enemy died. American units averaged 3-1 in a good month. The Australians were operating in the same jungle, facing the same enemy, fighting the same war. But they had cracked a code the Americans had not. They had learned that the jungle rewarded patience, silence, and intelligence over aggression, firepower, and presence. The enemy knew something was different. The sergeant showed Pearson translated documents from captured VC. One report from a battalion commander spoke of white ghosts who did not move like other soldiers. They did not walk on trails. They appeared and disappeared like spirits. VC ambushes found nothing. Their trackers could not follow the signs. When VC forces discovered a patrol position and moved to attack, the position was already abandoned. It was as if the jungle itself fought for the Australians. The report ordered units to avoid certain areas entirely. Better to take longer supply routes than to risk the white ghosts. Another captured document was more direct. It warned VC fighters not to pursue small contacts. The silent soldiers disappear, it said, and then fire falls from the sky. Minutes after contact, artillery shells arrived with devastating accuracy. The invisible watchers called in death from above. The document noted that these soldiers killed more with radios than with rifles. It was better to let them pass. Fighting them meant dying from explosions, not bullets. The feeling wrong aspect gnawed at Pearson. Every instinct screamed that small units were vulnerable. That firepower superiority won battles. That aggressive action defeated the enemy. That showing strength dominated terrain. He had learned these principles at West Point. He had practiced them for 25 years. He had commanded battalions and brigades using these ideas. They made sense. They felt right. They matched everything modern militaries believed about warfare. But sitting in that tent in the Vietnamese jungle, looking at the reports, hearing the statistics, seeing the confidence in these quiet Australian soldiers, Pearson felt doubt creep in. What if everything was backwards? What if the jungle war required the opposite of what conventional doctrine taught? What if 5 invisible men were worth more than 500 visible ones? What if patience was a weapon more powerful than bullets? What if the best soldier was the one who never got into a fight because he was too smart to be caught? The sergeant finished his briefing. The patrol would insert by helicopter at dawn, 6 kilometers from base. They would move slowly for 2 days into the long high hills. They would establish a hide position overlooking known enemy routes. They would watch. They would wait. They would report what they saw. If everything went perfectly, they would call in artillery on enemy positions, guide airstrikes onto targets, map supply routes, and return after 14 days without ever being detected. The sergeant looked at Pearson and said something that stuck in the general's mind for the rest of his life. He said, "Patience is a weapon that most soldiers never learn to use." The jungle rewards those who wait and punishes those who rush. That is our advantage. Pearson asked if he could observe the operation. The sergeant said the general could follow with a command element at 1 kilometer distance. Standard practice to avoid compromising the patrol. The general would monitor radio communications. He might see the results of the patrol's work, but he would not see the patrol itself. They would be invisible as they should be. Pearson agreed. He needed to understand this. He needed to see how 5 men could accomplish what he thought required a battalion. He needed to know if this strange approach could change how America fought this war. Tomorrow at dawn, he would start learning. Tomorrow he would watch ghosts go to work in the jungle. 16 days later, on February 8th, 1967, at 0615 hours, General Pearson got his answer. The patrol had been in the field for 2 weeks, and now they had found something. 6 kilometers northeast of Nui Dat Base, the jungle was still dark when the command helicopter lifted off. Pearson sat inside, head set on, waiting. The 5 SAS soldiers moved off the bird like smoke, silent and fast. By the time the helicopter's rotors wound up for takeoff, they had vanished into the green wall. General Pearson sat in another helicopter 1 kilometer away with an Australian command element. He wore a headset tuned to the patrol's radio frequency. He would hear their whispered reports. He would not see them. The sergeant's words echoed in his mind. "If you see us, something went very wrong." For 36 hours, there was nothing. Pearson monitored the scheduled radio checks. Each check was the same. 2 whispered words, "All clear." Then silence. The patrol was moving deeper into enemy territory at their glacial pace. 1 kilometer per day, maybe 2 if the terrain allowed. They were cutting through jungle so thick that American units avoided it entirely. They were walking where the enemy felt safe, and they were doing it invisibly. 0618 hours on the morning of the second day. The radio crackled softly. A whispered voice, so quiet Pearson had to strain to hear, "Contact, wait, out." Then nothing. Pearson felt his chest tighten. Contact meant the enemy. Wait meant they were assessing. Out meant no more communication until necessary. Minutes crawled by like hours. The general stared at the radio speaker. The Australian officers around him showed no emotion. They had heard this before. They trusted their men. 6 minutes later, the radio whispered again. "Enemy base camp, approximately 80 VC. Grid reference follows." The voice gave coordinates. One of the Australian officers plotted them on a map. The patrol had stumbled into a Viet Cong staging area. American doctrine was clear: call in reinforcements, establish a fire base, assault the position, destroy the enemy. That was what Pearson's units would have done. That was what he expected to hear next. Instead, the radio said, "Watch and count and map." Then it went silent again. For 4 hours, the patrol observed from 75 meters away. Pearson tried to imagine it. 5 men lying motionless in dense jungle, watching 80 enemies go about their daily routine. The heat building as the sun climbed, insects crawling on skin, sweat soaking clothes, unable to move, unable to swat mosquitoes, unable to shift position to relieve cramping muscles, just watching, counting, learning. One man would be on the radio, whispering updates so quiet they barely registered. The others would be mapping the camp, identifying targets, noting patterns. The radio updates came every 30 minutes. 83. Viet Cong confirmed. 3 weapons caches identified. 4 trails mapped. Mealtime 0930. Guard rotation every 2 hours. Command element in northwest bunker. Radio antenna southeast corner. Ammunition crates stacked near center. Document pouches visible near command bunker. Photographic intelligence attempted. The patrol was building a complete picture of the enemy base. They were patient, they were thorough, they were professional. At 11:45 hours, the patrol called for artillery, not from their position. They were too close. The fire mission came from the command element using the coordinates the patrol provided. 6 howitzers at fire support base Coral, 10 kilometers away. The guns were already loaded and ranged. The Australian artillery officer gave the command. Fire for effect. The shells took 40 seconds to arrive. Pearson heard them before he saw the smoke. The distinctive whistle of 105mm rounds falling in a pattern. Then the explosions, a rippling thunder that echoed through the hills. For 8 minutes, 150 rounds of high explosive poured into the enemy base camp. The jungle itself seemed to shudder. Trees splintered. Earth flew into the air. The sound was enormous, a continuous rolling boom, 11:53 hours. The patrol called again, adjusting. Wait, they were moving to a new position to observe the results. Pearson marveled at that. While the shells were still falling, the patrol was repositioning, not running away, not calling for extraction, moving to get a better view of what their work had accomplished. They were professionals doing a job. 12:30 hours. The assessment call came through, calm and measured. Estimate 60 enemy killed. 15 to 20 wounded extracted east on Trail Mike. 3 secondary explosions from ammunition cache. Base camp destroyed. Request clearance to track survivors. Out. 60 dead. 15 or more wounded and fleeing. The entire enemy position obliterated, and the patrol wanted to follow the survivors to find where they went next. General Pearson spoke for the first time in 90 minutes. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. What the hell did I just watch? He stared at the radio, then at the map, then at the Australian colonel. Those 5 men just did what would take me a battalion to do, and they did it without firing a shot. The Australian colonel smiled slightly. That is what we have been trying to tell everyone, sir. That is how you fight this war. Pearson shook his head slowly, still processing what he had witnessed. He had commanded operations involving thousands of soldiers. He had coordinated artillery, airstrikes, armor, and infantry in complex battles. But he had never seen anything like this. 5 men had just killed 60 enemies without firing a shot. They had called fire from 10 kilometers away with such precision that the enemy never even knew the patrol was there. The statistics rolled through Pearson's mind. 60 VC killed, 3 ammunition caches destroyed, intelligence maps updated with 4 new trail networks. Identification of a forward supply hub for the 274th Regiment. SAS casualties, 0. Ammunition expended by the patrol, 0. Artillery rounds used, 150, costing about $18,000. If his forces had assaulted that base with infantry, he estimated 12 to 18 American casualties, 40 to 50 enemy killed, 3 to 4 days of operations. The math was not even close. The follow-up operation demonstrated combined doctrine at its best. Using the intelligence from the SAS patrol, an American rifle company inserted by helicopter 2 kilometers east, exactly where the patrol said the fleeing VC would go. The enemy was running blind, panicked, carrying their wounded. They ran directly into prepared positions. American soldiers, for once, had perfect intelligence about where the enemy was going. The fleeing VC never had a chance. The radio reports from the American company were triumphant. Contact, heavy contact. Enemy in the open. Firing now. Then the count. 22. More enemy killed. 7 captured. American casualties. 2 wounded, neither serious. The company commander's voice over the radio was excited. It was rare to catch the enemy in the open like this. It was rare to have such good intelligence. It was rare to win so cleanly. General Pearson learned that the SAS patrol had directed the entire operation from their observation post. They watched the fleeing VC run into the American position. They adjusted the company's placement by radio. They warned when a group tried to flank. They called in artillery on a squad that tried to escape south. The patrol never fired their weapons, but they controlled the battle like chess masters moving pieces. 5 men had killed or caused the death of over 80 enemies in less than 6 hours. That evening, Pearson requested to meet the patrol commander. The 5 soldiers walked into the base at dusk, moving quietly through the perimeter. They looked exhausted. Their uniforms were filthy. Their faces were hollow with fatigue. But their eyes were alert and satisfied. They had done their job. They had done it perfectly. Pearson asked the sergeant the question that had been burning in his mind all day. How do you sit 75 meters from 80 enemies for 4 hours? The sergeant looked at him with those quiet eyes and answered, Sir, patience is a weapon. The jungle teaches that or it kills you. We are not in a hurry. The enemy is always in a hurry. That is why we win. The sergeant explained that rushing got you killed. Making noise got you killed. Being impatient got you killed. The jungle rewarded those who moved like the jungle itself, slowly, silently, with purpose. General Pearson asked about fear. Were you afraid they would find you? The sergeant shook his head. We were exactly where we needed to be. Wind was in our favor, carrying our scent away. We had good cover. We moved into position before dawn when they were still sleeping. By the time they woke up, we were invisible. If you do everything right, there is nothing to fear. You become part of the jungle. The enemy walks past you and never knows you are there. The enemy knew something now, though. Captured documents after the operation told the story. A diary found on a dead VC officer had entries from the previous week. The last entry said his unit had been ordered to avoid the eastern approaches. The silent soldiers were there. The battalion commander warned not to pursue small contacts. The Australians disappear and then fire falls from the sky. It was better to let them pass. They killed more with radios than with rifles. The diary ended with a note. 3 of our best trackers tried to find them last month. The trackers never came back. Another document, a tactical directive from the VC command, ordered units to change supply routes to avoid areas where the white ghosts operated. The directive noted that losses to artillery had increased by 40% in areas where these patrols were known to operate. It ordered faster movement through dangerous zones. It warned that staying in one place too long invited destruction from above. The SAS patrols had changed how the enemy moved, how they thought, how they planned. Fear was as powerful as bullets. Pearson sat in his tent that night, unable to sleep. He kept playing the day over in his mind. 5 men, 14 days in the jungle, patience, silence, intelligence, results that crushed conventional operations. He thought about his own units, his companies with their 120 soldiers crashing through the jungle. He thought about the casualties, the frustration, the endless patrols that found nothing or walked into ambushes. He thought about body count pressures from higher command. He thought about the gap between what worked and what his forces were doing. The general made a decision. He would implement modified reconnaissance protocols in his area of operations. Smaller patrols, longer duration, better training in tracking and silent movement, intelligence primacy over direct action. He would face resistance from his officers. It contradicted their training. It felt wrong, but the numbers did not lie. This approach worked. The jungle had rules, and the Australians had learned them. It was time Americans learned them too. The question was whether the institution would let him, whether the war machine could change fast enough to matter, whether 5 men in the jungle could teach lessons to an army of 500,000. Pearson hoped so, but deep down he was starting to doubt. By mid-1967, word spread through American Special Operations about what was happening in Phuoc Toi province. The statistics were impossible to ignore. Australian SAS patrols were achieving kill ratios of 18-1. Their casualty rates were 70% lower than conventional infantry. Intelligence gathered by their 5-man teams led to strikes that killed 10 times more enemy than their direct contact ever produced. Officers started visiting the Australian sector to observe. Some brought notebooks, some brought skepticism, all of them left changed. Macva Sog began sending teams to cross-train with Australian SAS. American Special Operations soldiers spent weeks learning the techniques: silent movement, tracking, patient observation, operating without fire support. The SOG teams adapted quickly because they already understood that conventional doctrine did not work in Vietnam. They were not bound by big unit thinking. They could move small and quiet. Within months, SOG reconnaissance teams were achieving results similar to the Australians. Small teams, deep penetration, long duration, minimal contact, maximum intelligence. US Army Rangers requested Australian instructors for their training programs. The Ranger School began incorporating 14-day reconnaissance exercises, patience drills, noise, discipline standards, tracking courses. The doctrine started spreading through the special operations community like water finding cracks. Those who were willing to learn found that the Australian methods worked. The problem was that special operations represented a tiny fraction of American forces in Vietnam. Conventional brigade commanders resisted the changes. General Pearson tried to implement modified patrol tactics in his area. He cut patrol sizes from 40 men to 12. He extended duration from 3 days to 7. He emphasized intelligence gathering over body count. His staff officers pushed back hard. Smaller patrols were more vulnerable. Longer operations exhausted the men. Intelligence without contact looked like failure in reports to division headquarters. The pressure from above demanded visible results, aggressive action, high body counts. Pearson's modified tactics worked in practice. Over 6 months, his brigade saw a 40% reduction in friendly casualties. Enemy kill doubled because better intelligence led to better artillery and airstrikes. But the reports he sent up the chain looked wrong to conventional minds. Contact reports decreased. Body counts from direct infantry action dropped. The patrols were doing exactly what Australian SAS did, calling in fire missions instead of closing with the enemy. Higher headquarters questioned whether his brigade was aggressive enough. The adoption was uneven across the American military. Some units learned and adapted. Others clung to conventional doctrine. The ones who changed saw immediate results. The ones who did not kept bleeding in the jungle. But there was no systematic change. No army-wide shift in tactics. Each brigade commander decided for himself. Some were open to new ideas, others preferred the familiar. The institution never fully embraced what the Australians had proven worked. The tragic irony was that by 1968, the Americans had the answer. Not everywhere, but in enough places to show it worked. Small professional teams using patience and intelligence could dominate the jungle, but the war strategy remained unchanged. Search and destroy operations continued. Body count remained the primary metric of success. Large units still swept through the jungle, making noise and losing men. The 12-month rotation policy meant that lessons learned in one year were often forgotten the next when new troops arrived. General Pearson retired in 1972, 3 years after his last tour in Vietnam. He had commanded at division level by then. He had tried to spread what he learned from the Australians. Some of his officers adopted the methods, others did not. In interviews years later, he was honest about the failure. "We learned how to fight the jungle war by 1968, he said, but we learned it in patches, in isolated units, in small teams. The institution never learned. We had the answer and we could not scale it because it contradicted everything we thought we knew about warfare. The enemy's perspective confirmed what the Americans were slowly realizing." Vietnamese military histories written after the war specifically mentioned Australian SAS patrols. They were noted in after-action reports as requiring specialized counter-reconnaissance protocols. VC commanders ordered their units to avoid areas known to be SAS operational zones. Supply units took longer, more dangerous routes to avoid the white ghosts. One captured VC colonel said in interrogation that his regiment lost more men to artillery directed by invisible watchers than to all direct combat combined in 1968. The long-term enemy response showed how effective the tactics were. By 1969, VC units were changing their entire approach in areas where Australian or American reconnaissance teams operated. They moved only at night. They avoided staying in camps for more than 24 hours. They stopped using established trails. They broke into smaller groups. All of these changes made them less effective as fighting units. The mere presence of professional reconnaissance teams forced the enemy to fight less efficiently. That was victory through intelligence, the exact principle the Australians taught. The bitter lesson was that tactical excellence could not overcome strategic confusion. The jungle taught clear lessons. Patience defeated aggression. Silence defeated firepower. Intelligence defeated presence. Highly trained specialists moving in small groups outperformed large conventional forces consistently. But the war's overall strategy never changed to reflect these truths. Body count remained the metric. Large sweeps remained the primary operation type. 12-month tours remained policy. The disconnect between what worked tactically and what the strategy demanded was complete. Statistics vindicated the Australian approach across the entire war. From 1967 to 1971, Australian forces in Vietnam achieved the lowest casualty rates of any Allied forces. Their kill ratios remained consistently above 15-1. Intelligence they provided led to successful operations by American and South Vietnamese forces throughout the region. They proved the concept worked. They proved it repeatedly. They proved it with numbers that could not be argued against. But the proof changed nothing at the institutional level. Modern military doctrine learned the lessons that the Vietnam-era military could not. The Special Operations community took what the Australians taught and built it into the foundation of modern reconnaissance tactics. When American forces went to Iraq and Afghanistan decades later, small teams operating independently with intelligence as the primary mission were standard. JSOC units used the same principles. Small footprint, local expertise, patience over aggression, intelligence over direct action. The tactics that felt wrong in 1967 became standard operating procedure in 2001. General Pearson gave a final interview in 1985, 13 years after retiring. He was asked about Vietnam. He was asked what he learned. His answer captured the entire tragedy. "I saw 5 men do what I thought required a battalion," he said. "I saw patience defeat aggression. I saw silence defeat firepower. I saw it, I understood it, I tried to spread it, and I watched the institution reject it because it was too small, too quiet, too strange." We had soldiers who could win the war one patrol at a time, and a strategy that required us to lose it one large operation at a time. That is not a military failure. That is a tragedy. The soldiers who learned the Australian way and survived brought those lessons home. They taught at military schools, they wrote manuals, they trained the next generation. The knowledge did not die completely. It went underground, preserved by those who had seen it work, waiting for a time when the institution would be ready to listen. That time came, but it came too late for Vietnam. It came too late for the men who died in ambushes that better tactics might have prevented. It came too late for the war that was lost despite tactical innovations that should have made victory possible. The Vietnamese jungle has reclaimed the old battlefields. Now. The fire bases are gone, the trails are overgrown. The base camps where 80 VC died in 8 minutes of artillery are covered in vegetation again. Farmers work the hills where patrols once moved in silence. Children play where soldiers once called in death from above. The physical traces of the war have faded, but the lessons remain written in operation reports and casualty statistics and the memories of those who were there. The lesson is simple and hard. Sometimes the whisper accomplishes what the shout cannot. Sometimes the best weapon is the one you never fire. Sometimes 5 patient professionals achieve more than 500 aggressive amateurs. Sometimes the institution cannot learn fast enough, cannot change quickly enough, cannot overcome its own assumptions, even when the proof is written in blood and victory. The Australian SAS taught that lesson in the jungles of Vietnam. Some Americans learned it, most did not. The war was lost, but the knowledge survived. That is the small grace in a story of larger failure. In the end, the sergeant was right. Patience is a weapon. The jungle teaches that or it kills you. The jungle taught, some learned, the jungle killed, the war ended. The lessons wait for the next time someone needs to learn them. They wait in the silence between the stories, in the gap between what works and what we are willing to do, in the space where 5 ghosts once walked invisible through green hell and changed how wars are fought forever. That is what the American general saw when he first watched Australian SAS soldiers fight in Vietnam. He saw the future. He just could not make the present catch up to it.